Think of the gay teenager. Comes out to his parents, comes out to his church, his community. What happens? He gets told that he's a fag and he can get out, kicked out the house, removed from the community. And he's done so explicitly in reference to Leviticus. This is a doctrine. This is the religion. This is the poison.
This is what we're calling moral? Yeah, we need to talk. Hello, humans. As always, thanks for stopping by. This is the place where we slow things down and actually question the beliefs most people never stop to examine. Today, we're breaking down one of the most intense debates on religion and morality, where one side says religion poisons everything, and the other says it's responsible for the good we see today. On one side, the atheist, arguing that religion poisons everything. On the other are theists, arguing that religion didn't poison the well, it built it. So, put away your feelings, open your mind, and question your beliefs. I want you to pay attention to this next part. This is where Stephen lays out his main argument, the idea that religion doesn't create morality, it contaminates it. Listen carefully to how he describes morality, because this is going to set up everything that comes next.
Picture an old village, and in the center of this village is a well, and within that well is everything that makes us human. We're talking of our decency, our love, our compassion, our hope. That's all in the well, and it's all human, it's all ours. And then, once upon a time, a religious community comes along, and they take over the village, and they approach the well, and they tip something in. They tip in their doctrines, they tip in their dogma, they tip in their revelations. And then the water changes. Now, the water still quenches your thirst, it still sustains life, but now in every cup, there is something extra. Centuries pass, and then something extraordinary happens. The religious people that tip down their substance in that well, they start claiming that the water is theirs. They say that without them, there would be no water. In fact, they get so bold as to claim that it was their ancestors alone that built the well. They are the reason that the society is sustained. This is nonsense. It's a fiction. It's a lie. The well was always human. The well was always ours.
Now, I'll be honest, I actually agree with this. This is a beautiful opening. It lets you see that we've always had the capacity to treat each other in different ways. In this example, the well represents morality. But you could even take it further. The well is really just human nature itself, our ability to act, to choose, to create. And here's the interesting part. We don't actually know how deep that well goes, but we do know it's always been there. Listen to this part one more time, because
the well was always human, the well was always ours. What I want to do now is, I want to do my esteemed colleague a favor. I want to explain what I'm not saying when I say that religion poisons everything, because ever since Christopher first wrote this book, all the way through his debates, it was grossly misrepresented. I understand why, it's easier to attack. I'm not saying that religion can't do good. I'm not saying that religious people can't do good. Of course they can. I'm not saying that everything that religion touches turns to ash, not even close. And I'm not saying that every religious person, when they clasp their hands in prayer, that they're doing so for selfish reasons or for malice. That's not the case. That would be a silly proposition. And I'm sure we can agree that whatever Christopher Hitchens was, he wasn't silly. Hitchens was actually very clear. He said that religion cannot do something uniquely good without introducing something bad. That is, religion cannot do something uniquely good without introducing something bad. A simple claim. Turns out that there is a very easy way to test this. You can actually test the theory with what I would call a trinity of hurdles, and here they are.
Now this is important because Stephen is clarifying something that often gets misunderstood. He's not saying religion never does good. He's saying that's not the claim. What Hitchens was actually arguing is much more specific. He's saying if religion is going to take credit for something good, it has to show that good couldn't exist without it. So the conversation shifts from, can religion do good, to something much harder. Does it do something uniquely good that nothing else can? And that's the challenge Stephen is setting up for Glenn. It's not enough to point to something good. You have to prove that religion is the reason it exists in the first place. Now listen carefully, because this is where he lays out those three hurdles.
All Glenn needs to do is to name a religious action taken or a religious principle held that comes clean and it's unique. And it needs to go over these hurdles. Number one, it needs to be genuinely good. Glenn will will easily go over this hurdle every single time because religion is associated with good things, charity, community, etc. The second hurdle is that he needs to show that it requires religion. That is to say that there is no secular equivalent. You couldn't achieve it without religion. I think he's going to struggle on this front. And the third is to show that it comes clean. That is, no conditions, no threats. So the charity needs to come without the implicit assumption or goal of conversion. The community needs to come without conformity. The hope needs to come without hell. My prophecy for this debate is that Glenn will cover the first hurdle every single time, no worries. I do not believe that he will cover all three even once. But notice, even if he were able to achieve this, he needs to do it again and again and again, because to show that just one cup from a well is clean does not mean that we would get our children to feed from that well. So, with that, that's my position, and I will give the floor to Glenn.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Now I want to hear from you. What do you think about those 3 hurdles? And more importantly, do you think that test is actually fair? Let me know in the comments below. All right, now let's see how Glenn responds to those 3 hurdles. Pay attention to how he answers this, because he doesn't just respond directly. He reframes the entire question.
Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I am Glenn. I'm Emma's husband. I'm Ruby and JJ's dad. I belong to Jesus, and that might make you think that I'm going to be pro-religion. I think a lot of what we talk about now will be, what do we even mean when we say religion? I often think back to, in the Bible, you've got Genesis chapter 11. One of the foundational texts in Scripture is the Tower of Babel, and there you've got humans who are trying to make a name for themselves, building towards heaven. And it is a very calamitous and poisonous vision of what religion actually is, and it's juxtaposed with Genesis chapter 12. Abraham is plucked from
Now that's interesting, because instead of directly clearing each hurdle, he shifts the focus to the role religion has played over time. So now the question becomes, did he actually answer the challenge, or did he change the question? All right, let's break this down, starting with the first hurdle. Is it actually good? And to be fair, Glenn clears this pretty easily. He points to compassion, charity, and human value, things most people agree are good. Now, the second hurdle is where things start to get harder. Is this something religion uniquely provides, or does it exist without it? Because those same values, compassion and charity, clearly exist outside of religion. And then the third hurdle, this is where the real tension is. Does it come clean? Meaning, no pressure, no threats, no hidden cost. And depending on your perspective, this is either where religion shines or where it struggles. So looking at it like this, Glenn does well on the first hurdle. The second one becomes debatable. And the third, that's where people split completely. So what do you think? Did he actually clear those hurdles or just get close enough? Up to this point, we've been dealing with ideas, but now the conversation moves into something much more real, because here they bring up slavery. And this is important because this is where the argument gets tested against reality. If religion shapes morality, then what do we do with something like this? Watch this carefully, because this is where they start responding to each other directly.
Yes.
That's it. So with the slavery, why is it that the Christians did not say, don't own another human being?
Well, but they did. So in the 4th century, it's the first record of anyone speaking against slavery as such is Gregory of Nyssa in 377.
So you're saying
right?
the first person to ever speak against slavery
As a whole, as an inherently wicked practice.
And the
there's
church,
plenty of slaves who didn't want to be enslaved.
and the church ignored him, didn't they?
No, the church was manumitting slaves by the tens of thousands as they could, right? What you're pointing to is the profound overturning of a social given.
No. We got to go quite some years till we get there, and we will. So in the 4th century,
Now, this is so important because you hear this in almost all Christian apologetics. Because what this is really saying is that God couldn't overturn slavery because it was too embedded into society. And if you agree with that, then you have to deal with this. Remember the Tower of Babel, the one time in the Bible where humanity was fully unified. God didn't wait. He stepped in immediately and broke that system apart. So that society wasn't too embedded for God to act on instantly. So if slavery needed time because it was embedded, then what does that even mean anymore? Go ahead and make your excuses in the comments below, but I think you've got a real problem here.
Yes.
they opt for Augustine.
Right.
Okay? They opt for Augustine, and he gives this great argument where he appeals to original sin. And of course, he has access to Leviticus, he has access to Ephesians, he has access to all of these books, all of the scripture, the doctrines. Notice he's actually giving you receipts. It's not vibes, it's not Jesus is my motif. No. He's giving you receipts. And the church take him, and they agree with him because he has the scripture. So
We're talking about original sin at the moment, or slavery?
Original sin,
Original sin.
and Leviticus, for example, where it's saying, Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also purchase temporary residents and members of their clans. They will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and make them slaves for life. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelite ruthlessly. So that's just one verse. I can go for Ephesians, Colossians, Peter, Exodus, you name it. So he has all of this data, he has all of this scripture, all of these doctrines, and so it's not a surprise that the church opts with him and slavery remains perfectly fine in that year.
That line right there is the entire issue of this debate, because if slavery was still acceptable at that time, then something isn't lining up. You would expect something that's truly immoral to be clearly rejected from the start. But instead, the explanation becomes that society wasn't ready yet. So now the question becomes, is morality leading society or following it? And how you answer that changes how you see everything that was just said. Because if something is wrong, it shouldn't need time to become wrong. Let's be fair to Stephen here. Let's see how he answers this problem. Then we'll get to our final thoughts.
But you must not rule over your fellow Israelite ruthlessly. So that's just one verse. I can go for Ephesians, Colossians, Peter, Exodus, you name it. So he has all of this data, he has all of this scripture, all of these doctrines, and so it's not a surprise that the church opts with him and slavery remains perfectly fine in that year.
For Augustine. So Israel did not invent slavery.
Mm-hmm. They made it worse.
No, they actually made it better. We'll get to that. So Israel did not invent slavery. This book did not invent slavery, but the people of this book are the only ones who actually ended it, right?
No.
So in the Old Testament, there was a practice that was legislated but not celebrated. And it is a practice that even scholars like Jeremy Bowen has said was an improvement on the ancient Near Eastern practices of the day. Leviticus 21, Deuteronomy 23, I should have said Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 23. Exodus 21 in terms of the treatment of beaten slaves, and Deuteronomy 23 in terms of returning runaway slaves. Even those who are most skeptical of Scripture recognize that the practice of Old Testament slavery was at least better than the ancient Near Eastern practices of their own day.
All right, so let's look at how Stephen responds to this. He starts pointing to verses that are supposed to make slavery look better. But here's the issue. None of these actually say slavery itself is wrong. At best, they talk about how you treat slaves, not whether slavery should exist at all. You can still beat your slave as long as they don't die immediately. Slaves aren't free to just leave. The system itself is still fully intact. Female slaves are treated differently and often worse, with fewer protections. In some cases, a slave could belong to someone for life. So none of this points to ending slavery. It just regulates it. And if that's the case, then the system isn't being challenged, it's being accepted. So after looking at both sides, this is where everything comes together. You have one side saying this was progress and another pointing out what still remained. Now I want to hear from you, but I want you to be completely honest. Not what you've been told, not what you've heard, and not just looking for excuses. Saying something is wrong in the Bible doesn't take away your ticket to heaven, and you can't lie to God anyway, right? So what do you actually think? Not what you feel, but what you truly believe is right. As always, I'm Jay. And don't forget, question your beliefs.